9:28 a.m. The International Convention Center was buzzing for the Global Sustainability and Supply Chain Summit. It was being live-streamed to millions. On stage, 35-year-old CEO Evelyn Hart stood before a sea of global investors. Suddenly, the guest of honor, a delegate from a remote, untapped region, began speaking in a rare dialect mixed with local slang. One by one, 12 elite interpreters froze. The headsets crackled. The technical terms were being mangled. The room began to whisper. Stocks started to dip. From the back, a 40-year-old man in a janitor's uniform, holding a toolkit, slowly stood up. "Excuse me, I can translate. Please don't let him be misunderstood." The entire hall turned. Noah Reyes was 40 years old, and his shoulders carried the invisible weight of a world that refused to look him in the eye. He was a thin man, his frame slightly bent not by age, but by years of heavy lifting, double shifts, and long nights spent under the flicker of industrial humming lights. As a logistics contractor for the convention center, Noah was a ghost in the machine. He was the first one in when the halls were cold and dark, and the last one out, usually seeing his own life only through the reflection of the polished marble floors he scrubbed to a mirror finish. He lived in a cramped two-room apartment that smelled of cinnamon and damp concrete with his 9-year-old daughter, Mia. Since his wife, Elena, had passed away in a tragic accident 3 years ago, Noah's life had been a brutal series of survival choices. He skipped meals so Mia could have fresh fruit. He walked 4 miles to work to save on bus fare. Today, the stakes were higher than ever. Rent was 2 weeks past due, and a red eviction notice sat tucked behind the toaster. He was hanging on to this job by a single frayed thread. That morning, the air had been crisp and unforgiving. As Noah dropped Mia off at the school gate, she looked at the frayed collar of his worn-out uniform. She reached out with a small hand and whispered, "Dad, are you going to be on time to pick me up today? You missed the last 2 times." Noah forced a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes, promising her he would, even though he knew the summit shift would drag late into the night. On their small, buzzing refrigerator, Mia had pinned a note with a magnet shaped like a star. Noah looked at it every single morning before he left. "Dad, don't let people make you small. You are a giant to me." Those words were his armor, protecting him from the condescending stares of the world outside. Noah hadn't planned to be in the main hall. He was a man of the shadows. But he had been called urgently to the VIP section by a frantic supervisor because of a short circuit in the primary audio translation relay. The experts were baffled, and the janitor was the only one who knew the wiring of the old building. He had brought his toolkit, sitting quietly in the very back row, waiting for the technical lead to give him the signal to move. As he sat there, invisible to the billionaires in the front, Noah heard the frantic, high-pitched whispers of the elite translators in the glass booths above. They were panicking. The delegate's dialect, a rare blend of mountain trade talk and coastal slang, wasn't in their Ivy League handbooks. They were guessing at meanings, grasping at straws, and their guesses were dangerously, catastrophically wrong. They were turning an offer of partnership into a declaration of war. On stage, Evelyn Hart was a vision of controlled, terrifying power. At 35, she was the CEO of Hart Global, a logistics giant. This summit was her make-or-break moment. A $12 billion green energy deal was on the table, and any sign of instability or miscommunication would send her skittish investors running straight into the arms of her rivals. Evelyn hated mistakes. She lived her life by a perfect, rigid schedule, measured in 6-minute increments. But right now, the schedule was shattered. She was losing control of the room. The language barrier was becoming a physical wall that was about to crush her father's legacy. When Noah finally stood up and said, "I can translate," the reaction was a physical wave of hostility. A VIP assistant, wearing a suit that cost more than Noah's apartment, rushed over, his face flushed with elitist anger. "Sir, sit down. This is a restricted area. You are here to fix wires and empty bins, not to talk. Guard, get this man out of here." The eyes of the world's elite, presidents, tycoons, and influencers, were fixed on Noah's faded blue uniform. They saw a janitor. They saw a nobody, They saw a glitch in their perfect event. Evelyn stood on the stage, her heart hammering against her ribs behind a mask of frozen ice. She had two choices: trust the official process that was currently failing her, or trust the unknown man looking at her with the steady gaze of a father who was used to being ignored. She saw his hands. They were calloused. They were scarred. They were the hands of someone who had built things from the ground up. "Let him speak," Evelyn commanded, her voice ringing through the speakers. The hall went silent. Evelyn raised a single, gloved hand, signaling the security guards to step back. The entire auditorium went cold. She looked at Noah through the blinding glare of the stage lights, her eyes searching his face for any sign of a joke. "You are saying you can translate," she said, her voice sharp and clinical. "We have 12 PhDs in those booths who are failing. What makes you think a logistics contractor can do better?" Noah didn't look for fame. He didn't look for the cameras. He stepped into the aisle, his toolkit clinking softly. "Enough to make sure he is understood, ma'am. He isn't talking about market fluctuations. He is talking about ancestral land rights. If you get this wrong, he walks, and the deal dies." Against the frantic, whispered warnings of her PR team, Evelyn signaled for a wireless microphone to be brought to Noah. The janitor didn't walk to the stage. He stayed in the aisle, maintaining his place. He didn't look at the billionaires. He looked at the delegate. The delegate, an older man with weathered skin, looked at Noah. He saw the uniform. He saw the calluses. He saw a brother in labor. Noah began to speak. His voice wasn't polished like the other translators. It was earthy, resonant, and carried the weight of someone who had lived the words he was saying. He didn't just translate vocabulary, he translated the soul of the speech. When the delegate used a metaphor about the breath of the land, the elite translators had called it climatology data. Noah translated it correctly. The community's historical right to the wind paths and the spirit of local labor protection. The delegate's eyes widened. He stood up, pointing at Noah, nodding vigorously. For the first time in 3 days, the man felt heard. He felt seen. He wasn't a resource anymore. He was a human being. Noah caught every subtle nuance. At one point he paused, holding up a hand to the delegate. He asked a clarifying question in that rare rhythmic dialect. "Just to confirm, when you say the Great River's silence, you mean the specific regional environmental audit regarding water table depletion, correct?" The delegate smiled, a wide, toothy grin, and clapped his hands. The auditorium fell into a profound, stunned silence. That was the exact legal point that 12 elite translators had mangled into a discussion about irrigation costs. Evelyn watched Noah from the stage. She saw the pilled fabric of his uniform. She saw the worn-out soles of his boots. She saw the deep scratches on his knuckles. But she also saw a man who moved with a quiet, unshakable dignity she hadn't seen in a decade of boardrooms. She found herself moving closer to the edge of the stage, her cold facade melting just a fraction. "Where did you learn that dialect, mister?" "Noah. Just Noah," he replied. "And I learned it from living, from needing to survive in places where people like me don't get a handbook." Years ago, Noah had been a migrant laborer. He had traveled through shipping docks, construction sites, and warehouses in 5 different countries. He had learned languages out of raw necessity to find food for his wife, to find work to pay for her medicine, to find a way home when they were stranded. He had been the unintentional interpreter for thousands of immigrants in crowded gray tenements, helping them sign hospital forms, negotiate with landlords, and navigate systems designed to keep them invisible. He wasn't a linguistic genius. He was a man whom life had forged into a bridge. During a scheduled 10-minute recess, the room exploded into whispers. Noah slipped away to a dark corner behind a curtain. He pulled out his phone. The screen was shattered in 3 places, held together by clear tape. He saw a new message from Mia. "Dad, I got a 9 on my spelling test. I'm waiting for you at the library. Don't be late." He quickly tucked the phone away, his heart heavy. He was terrified that the men in suits would see him and think he was a distracted, low-value worker. He tried to blend back into the shadows, but Evelyn Hart had followed him. She stood by a stack of equipment crates, her presence commanding even in the dim light. She saw the phone, she saw the tape, and she saw his wallpaper, a blurry, beautiful photo of Mia hugging him in front of a rusted city bus. Evelyn's world was a fortress of private jets and luxury, yet standing there in the logistics bay, she felt a sudden, sharp pang of envy. She saw the way Noah looked at that photo. It was a look of pure, unadulterated love. She hadn't been looked at that way in years. "You have a daughter," Evelyn said softly. Noah looked up, his body tensing instinctively. "She's the reason I can't afford to fail today, ma'am. I'm sorry if I overstepped. I'll go back to the floors now." Evelyn didn't respond with a corporate platitude. She looked at the man who had been a ghost to her just 2 hours ago. She realized that Noah Reyes was a man who had been pushed so hard by the world that he had no choice but to become extraordinary just to stay alive. "She's lucky," Evelyn whispered, "to have a father who speaks for those who can't." Had gathered a group of journalists. His had gathered a group of journalists, his voice booming through the hall. "This summit is a pathetic circus," Thorne sneered, glancing at the cameras. "Evelyn Hart is so desperate, she's letting a janitor handle a multi-billion-dollar international negotiation. Is this the future of Hart Global? Relying on the help? Her leadership is a sinking ship. The stock is a gamble, and I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole." On social media, the hashtag janitor summit began to trend like wildfire. The world was mocking Evelyn. Her board of directors, panicked and reactionary, sent a blistering message to her tablet. "Shut this down. Remove the laborer immediately. Return to the PhD translators or cancel the session. You are making us a global laughingstock." The head of convention security marched toward Noah. "Ma'am, he's not authorized to be on the microphone. We've checked his credentials. He's a Tier 4 logistics contractor. He has no security clearance for a live global broadcast. We need to escort him out." Evelyn's PR lead was at her ear, whispering frantically. "Evelyn, if he says one wrong word, one slip of the tongue on this live stream, it's over. The brand is dead. We have to play it safe. Let the PhDs try again." Evelyn stood at the edge of a precipice. She could choose safety, which meant failing in a way that followed the rules. Or she could choose truth, which meant trusting the man in the faded blue uniform who was currently being treated like a criminal. One of the lead translators, a woman with 3 degrees and a bruised ego, spoke into a hot microphone, her voice echoing through the hall. "He's just a janitor. He probably picked up a few phrases from a street market. He can't possibly understand the legal complexities of a mineral rights treaty. It's an insult to our profession." Noah heard it. The words hit him like physical blows. He didn't respond, but his jaw tightened until it ached. He gripped his toolkit so hard his knuckles turned white. He was used to being just a janitor, but hearing it broadcast to the world, hearing it used as a weapon against the one person who had given him a chance, it felt like a mountain was being dropped on his chest. He looked at the exit. He thought about Mia. He thought about the eviction notice. Evelyn Hart stepped onto the center of the stage. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked at the security guard. "Get your hands off him," she said, her voice booming through the auditorium with a power that shook the chandeliers. "He isn't just anything. Right now, he is the only person in this 10-acre building who is actually solving a problem. He is the only one who showed up prepared to listen instead of just prepared to talk." The hall went so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Evelyn turned to Noah. "Noah, can you continue? The world is watching." Noah looked at her, then at the delegate, then at the cameras. He took a deep breath. "I can continue, ma'am, but I need 30 seconds. The reason the translation is failing isn't just the language. Your audio system has a phase cancellation issue in the wireless relay. It's making the delegate's sibilant sounds disappear. To the translators in the booths, he sounds like static. That's why they're guessing." In front of a live global audience, the janitor knelt on the floor. He didn't use a laptop, he used a screwdriver. He opened a floor panel, swapped 2 fiber optic cables, and adjusted a frequency dial on the base of the microphone stand. He was fixing the very equipment the million-dollar tech team had ignored because they were too busy looking at their monitors. "Try it now," Noah said. The delegate spoke. The sound was suddenly crystalline. Perfect. The climax of the summit arrived when the delegate began to discuss the ancestors' debt. The rivals were leaning forward, waiting for Noah to trip. But Noah didn't just translate. He paused and clarified. "Ma'am, he's using a metaphor. He isn't asking for more money. He's warning you about a 1924 regulatory trap regarding subsurface mineral ownership. If you sign the current draft, you'll be in violation of regional law within 6 months. He's trying to save you from a lawsuit." Noah translated the warning with terrifying precision. Evelyn's legal team scrambled, their faces turning pale as they realized Noah was right. Evelyn was able to adjust the contract language in real time, right there in front of the cameras. If she had been 2 minutes slower, if she had listened to her board, the deal would have been a suicide pact. Thorne stood up, shouting from the front row, "Are you running a global corporation, Hart? Or are you gambling your future with a random laborer who probably can't even read the contract?" Evelyn didn't even look at the contract. She looked Thorne in the eye. "I'm not gambling, Marcus. I'm listening to the person who is actually providing value. He didn't ask for power. He didn't ask for a seat at this table. He only asked for one chance to be useful. And unlike everyone else I've paid today, he actually is." When the final session ended and the delegate signed the digital pad, the room erupted into a stunned, heavy silence. The deal was done. Noah didn't wait for a trophy. He didn't wait for a handshake. He felt the adrenaline leave his body like a retreating tide, and a wave of pure, cold fear replaced it. He walked quickly backstage, his toolkit heavy in his hand. He was terrified. He thought, "Did I say too much? Am I going to be fired for making the PhDs look bad? What will happen to Mia if I lose this contract?" He sat on a wooden crate in the dark logistics bay, whispering to himself, his head in his hands. "Mia, please let this be worth it. Please let me keep my job." Evelyn had won the deal. The stock was soaring. The media was already calling it the janitor's miracle. But she wasn't looking for her board members. She was looking for the man who had seen the phase cancellation in her life. Evelyn didn't send her security team to fetch him. She didn't call for a PR photo op. She walked down to the cold, echoing logistics bay herself. She found Noah sitting on a rusted metal bench, wiping grease from his palms with a rag that was more black than white. He looked small. He looked like the weight of the world had returned to his shoulders. "Noah," she said, her voice echoing off the concrete. He jumped to his feet, his face turning ghostly pale. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken like that to the investors. I was just trying to make sure the wires were—" "I'll go back to the floors now. I'll be out of your way." "You saved more than my speech today, Noah," Evelyn said, stepping into the dim light. "You prevented a misunderstanding that would have put 10,000 people out of work next year. You saved the deal, and you saved me from a mistake that would have defined my career." Noah looked at his boots. "I just translated the words, ma'am. I knew the dialect from the docs. That's all it was." "No," Evelyn corrected him, her voice firm. "You listened. Everyone else was too busy looking at their degrees and their titles to hear what that man was actually trying to say. They were looking at his clothes. You were looking at his heart." She paused, her gaze falling on his cracked phone sitting on the bench. "I want to thank you properly. I can write you a check right now that will pay your rent for the next 5 years. I can buy you a house. I can make sure you never have to pick up a screwdriver again." Noah looked up. He didn't even blink at the mention of the money. He didn't hesitate. "I don't want a one-time check, ma'am. With all respect, a check won't change who I am. I want a stable job. I want a role where I can use what I know. And I want hours that let me pick up my daughter from school every day. I want her to not have to worry if we're moving out of our home next month." Evelyn was stunned. She was used to people asking for millions, for power, for fame. Noah was asking for the simple dignity of being a father who was present. She looked at her world, a world where a piece of paper from a university was the only thing that gave a person a voice. She realized she had been blind to the massive ocean of talent hidden in her own hallways, covered in blue uniforms and grease. The next afternoon, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in her entire adult life. She didn't go to the boardroom. She went to the library near Mia's school. She stayed in her car until she saw Noah walk up in his old patched jacket. Mia ran into his arms, her face glowing. But then she saw Evelyn standing by the sleek black sedan. Mia looked at the powerful, cold woman in the designer suit, then at her father's worn clothes. The little girl said something that made the steel magnolia freeze in her tracks. "My dad speaks in many ways, ma'am. People just don't listen to the quiet ones, do they? They think because he cleans. He doesn't have a voice." Evelyn knelt down on the sidewalk, ignoring the dust on her expensive skirt, so she was at the girl's level. "I'm listening now, Mia. Your dad is the bravest man I've ever met. He spoke when the whole world was silent." For the first time in 3 years, Noah Reyes stood a little taller. It wasn't because of a check. It wasn't because of a promotion. It was because his daughter was seeing him being respected by the person the world thought was bigger than him. Noah realized he wasn't small. He had just been placed in a room that was too small for his spirit. Evelyn realized she had lived her life in a bubble of credentials. She began to think of all the other Noahs in her company, the drivers, the warehouse workers, the technicians, who had brilliant minds but weren't authorized to speak. The recovery wasn't just about Noah getting a job. It's about Evelyn correcting the logical errors within her own soul. 3 weeks later, a courier delivered a formal contract to Noah's new sun-drenched apartment. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a newly created position, Director of Intercultural Logistics and Operational Integrity. It came with a flexible schedule, a salary that meant Mia would never have to worry about a star on the fridge again, and full support for single parents. Noah read every single line with the same precision he used to fix a short circuit. He didn't sign it immediately. He had been promised things before by people in suits that turned out to be hollow. He went to Evelyn's office on the 50th floor. "I'll take the job," Noah said, his voice steady and clear, "but only on one condition." Evelyn smiled, leaning back in her chair. "What is it, Noah? A bigger car? A private office?" "No. I want to build a program within Heart Global to find the invisible workers. The ones in the basements, the ones on the docks. I want to find the people with skills who are being ignored because they don't have the right degree. If they have a talent, we train them. We give them a path to the stage. I want to take down the authorized-only signs on the doors of opportunity." Evelyn was silent for a long time. She looked at the portraits of the elite board members on her wall, then back at the man in the simple, clean button-down shirt. "Deal," she said. "We'll call it the Reyes Initiative." Mia drew a new picture that night. It wasn't an airplane with a shadow. It was a giant golden summit hall. In the middle of the stage was her father, holding a microphone, surrounded by people in all kinds of uniforms, janitors, pilots, and CEOs. At the bottom of the drawing, Mia wrote in her best cursive, "One chance can change a whole room, but one voice can change the whole world." Months later, at the next global summit, the hall was filled with the world's most powerful people. Noah wasn't in the back row with a toolkit. He was at the primary coordination desk, moving with a quiet, unshakable confidence. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a simple, tailored suit. He looked like he belonged. Evelyn walked past him as she headed to the stage. She didn't give him a command. She didn't look at him like a subordinate. She whispered, "Thank you for being brave when everyone else was frozen." Noah replied, "Thank you for listening." The world didn't change overnight. There were still people who looked at Noah and saw a lucky janitor. But Noah didn't care. He knew his value. He knew his voice. And most importantly, as the clock hit 4 p.m., he put down his headset, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door. He was home in time to see his daughter smile. And this time, he wasn't a shadow in her drawing. He was the light. If you believe that sometimes we don't need a miracle, we just need someone to finally listen to the voices in the shadows. Hit subscribe for more stories. And let me know in the comments, have you ever been the one to stand up and speak when the whole world was trying to keep you quiet?